Tonight's program is in correlation with the exhibit Withstand Latinx Art in Times of Conflict. This juried exhibition, curated by Gaby Magana and Rosa Ana Orlando, investigates the idea of resistance and its multiple ramifications in the visual arts, as well as the impact of political and/or social conflict on the creative process. Our talk this evening will touch on how police violence has affected communities of color, specifically with the history of the Joe Campos Torres case and the Houston Latinx community. We are honored to host tonight's guest, Dr. Dwight Watson, Janie Torres, and our moderator for this evening, LIAC Chair, Dr. Jesus Esparza. Before we begin, we ask that you please submit your questions for our guest in the Q&A box or in our chat box as well. Thank you again for joining us, and I will go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Jesus Esparza.
Thank you, Dr. Tovar. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's event. As Dr. Tovar mentioned, my name is Jesse Esparza. I am the chairperson for the Latino Initiatives Advisory Committee, and I will serve as tonight's moderator. In correlation with the exhibit Withstand Latinx Art during times of conflict, which is on display now at the Holocaust Museum. In correlation with this exhibit, it is our pleasure to have two presenters at tonight's gathering. Author and historian, Dr. Dwight Watson, assistant professor of history at Texas State University in San Marcos, who will discuss his book titled Race and the Houston Police Department, 1930 to 1990, where he highlights his research from a specific chapter of that book on Joe Campos Torres, a Vietnam War veteran who fell victim to police violence during the Chicano movement. We also have civil rights activist and agent for social justice, Janie Torres, who is the younger sister of Joe Torres and who will discuss her family's search for justice following his brutal murder in 1977. Additionally, Janie will inform us of the annual Torres Memorial Walk that she organizes, and we are looking forward to both of their presentations. Thank you, and we can begin first with Dr. Watson. Dr. Watson, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you for being here.
Good evening. Thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Ms. Tovar, for inviting me, and thank you, Holocaust Museum, for putting on the exhibit. It is good to see Janie again. When I spoke at U of H, she was there, as well as the police officer whose leg was broken at Moody Park. Tonight, I'm going to talk to you about police violence, specifically in the case of Jose Campos Torres, which happened on May 5th, 1977. 10 years before that, the event called the Tsu Riot had occurred on May 17th, 1967. Herman Short, Houston's version of Bull Connors from Birmingham, had declared that no citizen of the state of the city of Houston would disobey the law, and the Tsu Riot would break out that night and result in the death of one police officer and a long trial of the TSU-5. This case, 10 years later, is one in a series of police homicides that occurred between 1967 and 1979. The murder of Jose Campos Torres, again, happened on May 5th, 1977. Torres' death raised some issues. One, did race play a significant factor in his death? What kind of respect did police have for Mexican Americans, now Latinx people? Did police training and procedures validate the kind of aggression meted out against Torres? And then what about the code of police silence? I will attempt to answer some of these, but first let's begin with who Jose Campos Torres was. Jose was born in Houston in 1953 to Jose Luna Torres and Margaret Torres. He was a Vietnam-era veteran who had served 3 years in the Army, 1973 to 1976, as a member of an elite mountain unit until his heavy drinking led to multiple arrests and him leaving the military. Those who knew him suggested that when he drank, his temper got worse. But family members and friends who knew him said that he was gracious, gregarious, and he always tried to take care of members of his own family. But there was one salient truth. Alcohol was a problem for Jose. And when he drank, he did get angry. And the combination of alcohol, race, and violence would lead to the event that will become what I call the murder on the bayou. The city's sustained growth of Mexican population forced police to make quick, systematic adjustments. There was never many more than 3 Mexican or Spanish people, officers on the force. That was until the 1970s when the numbers started to increase. 1980s, they increased exponentially. Part of that was due, in fact, to the reclassification of Mexican Americans in the US Census in 1970, from being Caucasian to a Spanish-speaking ethnic minority. Prior to this, the majority of those who operated in the service of policing from 1930 to about 1959 or 60 were special police officers, such as prominent citizens in the community like mortuary owner Manuel Crespo. They were called upon to provide surveillance and to ensure that the community was protected and that toughs and ruffians would be turned over to the police. There's very little evidence to suggest that these men turned over people just for spite. They wanted to maintain some kind of cordial relationship with Houston's majority populations. But as the Mexican numbers increased in the city, the old Latin squad will ultimately give way to, in 1979, the Chicano Squad. Well, Jose Campos Torres started drinking early at Club 21, a hole-in-the-wall bar at 4700 Canal Street along the Houston Ship Channel. Jose, according to police, had been on a 12-hour alcohol binge and had put him in a rage. He and the bar manager had a contentious relationship, and some say they frequently got into scuffles. This time, Bella told him he was banned from the bar. Jose refused to leave. Bella called the police. At 11:35, the first officer arrived. MG Opeza arrived. And when he entered the bar, he and Torres entered into a fracas, the newspaper suggested. Torres still refused to leave. Then a rookie patrolman, Carlos Elliott, recalled that when we entered the bar, I found another officer tussling with the actor, meaning Jose Campos Torres. It took 3 officers to subdue Torres. Now, it must be stated here that Torres is no more than 5'7", I believe, and about 150, 60 pounds maximum. but his diminutive stature was really difficult for the police to subdue. The fight went on and Taurus was enraged. Once subdued, he was handcuffed and placed in the police car. He was still in a drunken rage. He continued to curse and yell at the officers. Jerome Skolnick, a sociologist, writes, when a citizen makes an officer sweat to do his job, to take them into custody, he creates a situation that is most apt to lead to police indignation and anger, and sometimes an outright beating. Patrolman Joseph Janis had suggested earlier that they teach Taurus a lesson. As other patrolmen heard about the call on the radio and that Taurus was still belligerent, their adrenaline fueled a rage, and they were seething at anger at the fact that he was verbally sparring with the police officers. More so, the police were verbally sparring with a drunken man. The patrolman made an impulsive move to stop the car on the way to the jail. They pulled into an area that is called the Dead Zone, around 1200 block of Commerce, down off of the bayou. They took the handcuffed prisoner out, and in their hideout, as it is called, Orlando and others began to teach Taurus a lesson. Carlos Elliott said he thought the men had made a wrong turn. He didn't know where they were going since he was a rookie. But as they surrounded Taurus, who cursed and spat at them, it was clear that they intended to teach him a lesson. Elliott, who sat in the car, recalled that he turned away because they were beating him and hitting him awful hard. The officers then placed the suspect in the car to take him to jail. Well, the city jail had a problem. They were about to be placed under a special master if another prisoner had died in jail or sustained serious injuries in the city's jail. When they brought him to the jail, they signed him in. The jailer would not take Taurus because of the cuts on his leg and the bruises on his face. It was the end of the ship for the officers. They were told to take him to the charity hospital so he can be checked out by a doctor. And if he is unfit for the jail, then they will admit him to the hospital and one of the officers would have to stay with him. Thus, they left, angry and about to expose the city to potential liability. It was late. These officers were angry, they were tired, they had been fighting. Not a justification, just an explanation of their actions. And they sure as hell didn't want to take Taurus to the doctor. Rather, they decided that Taurus, who was now still swearing and letting them know that he was not afraid of him. According to the officers, Taurus allegedly refused to go to the hospital to be checked by a doctor. To them, he was an unruly Mexican, one man said, who needed to be taught respect. After leaving the jail, Officer Orlando made an impulsive decision that proved fatal for Taurus, who by now had been reduced to a subhuman level. This is the third fight of the evening. prejudice, anger, ignorance, and Taurus's intoxication became a dangerous and deadly mix. Orlando radioed others and told them where to meet in the dead zone. At the edge of the bayou, they intended to give Taurus a painful dose of respect, they said. According to defiant patrolman Glenn Brinkmeyer, I really wanted to teach Taurus a lesson about respecting the law. In 1970, police had used force in the United States in ever increasing numbers. By 1977, policing in the country police were considered very mean people. Mayor Hoffines, at the time when I interviewed him, said there was something sick in the police department, and it was real dangerous. When the police officers drove back to the hole, it was hazy and the waters were murky in Buffalo Bayou. There they betrayed the public trust. Their subsequent actions breached human decency. Officer Denson said that they took Taurus to the bayou to talk some reason into him. Taurus was intoxicated. Taurus had been beaten 2 to 3 times. Once there, they took Taurus out the car and they unhandcuffed him. He stood motionless for a moment. And the officers whipped him for what appeared to be an hour, one officer said, but was more like 5 to 10 minutes. The officers and Taurus, with blackjacks and boots, they beat and kicked Jose. Somewhere in the melee, Taurus fell into the bayou. Corliss Elliott, the rookie, said, "Oh my God, they pushed him in the bayou." He would later change that to say they either pushed him or he fell. They said that they were giving him a chance for freedom. Taurus fell into the bayou. The officers allegedly hurled explicatives at him. Then the officers put a spotlight on the water and they did not see him. One officer said he's probably hiding. Rage and prejudice impaired the judgment of the officers, who apparently did not even consider that Taurus was too intoxicated to swim. After he entered the water, the police lost sight of him. They assumed he was hiding, but in truth, Taurus would disappear under the water. In a moment of soul searching, the rookie officer, Corliss Edward, feared something had gone wrong, and he was right. His brother and his father were police officers, and he went to talk to them. And when he talked to his dad and brothers suggested he go talk to the police chief. Well, in the police department, there is a code. And in that code, one officer does not tell it on another officer. Well, this would have been fine, except Taurus's aunt, Dolores Perez, came looking for him. She called HPD on May 6th and was told by the jail attendant that Taurus was not in custody. This was a half-truth in the chorus of lies that for a moment would be the closest thing to the truth the Taurus family would receive. Because the officers involved had all initially lied about Taurus's whereabouts. Taurus was just a missing person. An internal investigation later revealed that the policeman gave conflicting accounts of the event that led to Taurus's death. Generally, those involved either said or implied that they let Taurus go, that he had never been in custody in the first place, one officer said. But there was a problem. When they took him to the jail, they had signed Taurus in. When they was supposed to take him to the hospital, they forgot to erase his name from the jail blotter. 3 days passed and Taurus's body was found floating in Buffalo Bayou on May 8th. 1:30 p.m., a tour boat operator by the name of David Razel found the bloated body of Taurus face up in Buffalo Bayou, 100 yards upstream from the McKee Street Bridge. He used his boat and his hook on the boat. He described Taurus as wearing a t-shirt, a green army type fatigues, jump boots, and a belt with an Indian belt buckle. Because the officers had thrown Taurus's wallet in the water with him, no identification was with him. Only the persistent calls of his relatives were what made authorities realize that Taurus was someone who was cared for, who was somebody who was important and significant. After hearing the report on the local TV that a body had been found, his aunt called the morgue. She and her husband arrived at the morgue, according to the Houston Post, at 10:30 p.m. to give a description of the clothing that Taurus was wearing the day he disappeared. Due to the advanced stages of decomposition, investigators took their statement, but would not let them visually identify the body there. Ultimately, Taurus was positively identified by his fingerprints by the Harris County Sheriff's Department. The discovery of Taurus's body caused an immediate stir in the city. On the morning of May 9th, 1977, Houston was rocked when Harris County Medical Examiner, Dr. Joseph Jahimchek, viewed as one of the best in the business, gave his preliminary coroner's inquest report that no one as drunk or beaten as badly as Taurus could have swam across the bayou. The cause of death, therefore, is drowning homicide. The autopsy report went further. Taurus died of asphyxia drowning. He had suffered deep lacerations on his shins from being hit with flashlights and batons. He had contusions on his right temple, on his right hand and wrist and both shins. The severity of the beating that he suffered was evident because of the advanced stages of decomposition in certain parts of his body. Also, he had bruises, according to Jahimchek, on the bottom of his feet. Taurus had been wearing military-style jump boots with a steel toe and thick sole, So the blows had to be with great force. Now, the Harris County Examiner had ruled Taurus's death a homicide. A stunned police department administration on May 10th quickly suspended all 5 officers involved. Then, in a more astonishing move, the Harris County District Attorney, Carol Vance, charged Denson and Orlando with murder. The indictment of the other 3 officers would follow soon. The city was tense and tired of police brutality and police impropriety. A contrite chief, B.G. Pappy Bond, finally acted by saying, I've made a decision. I will form a permanent internal affairs division. The new division would investigate allegations of wrongdoing by police. External pressures against police mounted, and the Justice Department got involved. And when the Justice Department got involved, the police department, fearing outside interference, began to move fast. The truculent police department did not want federal interference, nor did they want to be directed by the DA's office. So they began to do damage control. As the FBI began investigating HPD in the 1970s for other allegations of corruption in which officers had been arrested, they actually went back to the days of Herman Short. Short had fallen on the bad side of the FBI when it appeared that George Wallace, if he had won the presidency, would have fired J. Edgar Hoover and appointed Herman Short as FBI director. Short retires in 73, and the police department is turned over to Bond and then later Harry Cardwell. Taurus, like the Tsu Riot, according to Mayor Harfines, created a lot of politicians in this city. Mexican-American activists called for quick, decisive action. Pappy Bond and Mayor Harfines received an angry letter from political leaders. State Representative Ben Reyes called for a police oversight board. LULAC, and now the Chicano movements that had previously opposed each other were now working together. Also, group cohesion from other groups outside of the Mexican-American community began to speak up. The grand jury returned an indictment. Denson, Orlando Brinkmeyer, Louis McKinney, Joseph Dennis were charged. Denson and Orlando were charged with murder. Brinkmeyer, Kinney, and Janice were charged with misdemeanor counts. Officer Ellis was returned to duty but fired by Chief Bond for dereliction of duty. Others say he was punished because he told it on the other officers. The Houston Patrolmen's Association helped the officers get legal representation. And they got some of the best lawyers there were: Racehorse Haynes, Mike Ramsey, Bob Bennett. Reacting to the firings, the police department held an unofficial vote of confidence. Pappy Bond had stepped down, and now Harry Cardwell, who would ultimately become the first police chief with a Ph.D., was also viewed with quite a bit of suspicion because of his braggadocious personality and the fact that he had moved up the ranks quickly. The rookie officer who had broken ranks really felt dejected and demoralized from being fired. The other men showed little or no remorse in the death of Taurus. Richard Racehorse Haynes, who had argued cases for the Houston patrolmen, had set a standard by which would be used in this case, and that is the change of venue. Percy Foreman and his predecessors, Frank Briscoe and others, would all serve as consulting counsel for the city of Houston or Harris County. The DA sent the best he had. District Attorney Burt Graham, whom I talked to during this process of writing the book, and Ted Toothbrush Poe, probably the two best prosecutors they had. They called Ted Poe Toothbrush because if you were going up against him, you better have your toothbrush because he was sending you to jail. Before the trial began, federal authorities let it be known that civil rights charges could be and possibly would be filed. U.S. Attorney Tony Canales, who had been a cop himself, who was still upset about the murders of two suburban white youth, Randy Webster and Billy Keith Jovis in the 1970s, and the throwdown guns, still had serious questions about the integrity of the Houston Police Department. Well, the first thing they did was move the case from Harris County to Walker County, where Sam Houston State University School of Criminal Justice is, and the prison is there. The prosecution opened in September of '77. Both sides presented, according to Richard Racehorse Haynes, a hell of a case. But we knew that no law-abiding citizen of Walker County was going to find a police officer guilty of a crime when he committed that crime in his uniform. Wow, I said. Poe skillfully caught the officers in one lie after another. He forced Orlando to read his perjured testimony to the jury. Denson actually did what Denson actually did on the night that Taurus was killed. In essence, they were turning on one another. Poe concluded in his cross-examination of Orlando by saying that, Orlando, I really didn't see him. Did you? Did you see him? No, I didn't, Orlando responded. Burt Graham grilled the other officers, who answered in straight, tough, unemotional style. But during the trial, Graham displayed Taurus's weathered boots as a visual reminder to the jury. Ramsey and Bennett would follow the lead set by Haynes and Racehorse Haynes and Percy Foreman in the other trials. And they would be aggressive by trying the character of Jose. Ramsey's arguments were a semantical masterpiece. He interjected wherever he could that his client didn't push Taurus or drag him into the bayou. Denson, according to Ramsey, walked Taurus to the edge of the water. And then in his subtle rhetorical style, he said, these boys didn't push him in. This was an accident. An unfortunate accident. On October 4th, the judge returned with the judge instructed the jurors that they must acquit defendants or convict them on one of four possible charges. Number one, defendants convicted of murder if they feel the officers intended to do bodily harm. Intent. Two, the cause of Taurus's death was through the direct and clear dangerous actions of the police officers. If Taurus's death was caused by the reckless conduct of the officers, then you must find them guilty of manslaughter. They could convict the men of negligent homicide if they felt that the defendants knowingly ignored the dangers that led to his life. Finally, the officers could be returned with a conviction of simple assault. After 3 days of tense deliberation, and the jury was nearly deadlocked twice, the officers were convicted of a misdemeanor charge of negligent homicide. They would not serve any jail time. Judge Warren sentenced them to probation and fined them $1 each. Murder is not a crime, the Houston Post stated early the next morning. But then on January 23rd, 78, the federal trial would open in the court of Ross Sterling. And in the court of Ross Sterling, a similar outcome would occur. The men, though, would be found guilty. However, the judge will ameliorate the sentences against them, and the men's sentence would be no more than a year. The community and the federal judiciary was in an uproar. The judge made an appeal to the federal appellate court, stating that they had violated his rights as a judge by overturning his decision or challenging his decision. The Supreme Court ruled in favor of the judge. And then the tensions broke on May 7th, 1978. Houston police decided that they were going to force a crowd of Mexican Americans and angry militants, as the police described them, who were in Moody Park for Cinco de Mayo, to commiserate over the unfair sentence handed down, but also about the treatment that the police department had given toward many in the Chicano community. By now, they had rejected gradualism, Chicano youth. They had rejected moderation. They were demanding immediate change. The politics of Houston were forever changed by Taurus's death. Travis Morales and Richard Vara, who could not contain the crowd once the police had provoked them. See, the police had done much like they had done in the TSU riot. They had lined up quite early, and they served somewhat as provocateurs to the crowd. And as the Moody Park riot erupted, the police used force to attempt to show that they had authority and that they could maintain order at any cost. After the riot and the arrest of the activists, in on May 16th, 1978, the Justice Department asked the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals to overturn the suspended sentences that the judge had handed down for the 10-year felony sentences violation. Judge Sterling's decision was therefore immediately appealed, and a 3-judge tribunal said that Sterling must correct the illegal sentences, and of course Sterling appeals, and the appellate court goes with Sterling, and the lenient sentences stand. So now the politics of Houston will forever be changed. By 1971, Barbara Jordan and Curtis Graves were the first Blacks to 67 rather, to enter the House of Representatives. And now Jordan won her US House of Representatives seat in 71. Chandler Davidson, a historian, a sociologist at Rice, said that for statewide offices, beginning in the late 70s and early 80s, Mexican Americans were the big winners at the state political lottery. And a lot of this can be ascribed to the activism that grew out of the repeated violations of police brutality. I'm going to stop here because I think it is time to allow people to ask questions. The Moody Park riot was a show of the frustration of a community. The reaction by the police was a show of authority on the part of the institution that had led to much of the violence we see in the death of Taurus. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Watson, for that. We are going to conduct the Q&A at the end of our program. At this moment, then I'd like to switch it over to Janie Torres, who will speak to us briefly about the efforts that she does to uphold the memory of her brother, Jose Campos Torres. So Janie, I'll turn it over to you and to Dr. Tovar for the next part of the presentation.
Hello, Dr. Thank you. It was hard hearing this story right now, Dr. Watson. Thank you. What we've been doing for the past couple of years is humanizing Joe, humanizing my brother. As a human being, as someone's son, someone's brother, someone's loved one. The people only know him as what has been said of his actions that day at the bar, at the Club 21, as he was drunk, belligerent. Some people described him mouthy, violent. That's all they know Joe as, but I'm his sister. I know him as good person, very strict. He was in the military, very strict, but still was able to be a loving person. Was a loving person. Hearing the story and remembering the story is very painful for us. It's been very painful since day one. My mom, that's her firstborn, her oldest son. He was more a protector of us all growing up. He was a very disciplined person, self-disciplined actually. Yes, he was very, very intoxicated that night. He was extremely intoxicated that night. There's no way he could have survived. There's just no way. You know, just like the coroner said, someone in that condition as he was, someone that intoxicated with such severe beatings that he got, there was no way he would have survived. Today we do a solidarity memorial walk in his honor. And also solidarity walk and for future generations as well. It is in his honor, but we also include others before him and others after him, and those from today's times as well. They're also included in our walk, in Joe's walk. We don't we don't leave anyone behind. You know, we keep them close with us in our hearts. Because we know what they're feeling, we know what they're going through, we know what the family's going through, and we try to keep Joe's story alive, no matter how painful it is, but it's something that has to be kept alive and shed light on other families, on other victims of police brutalities and police killings, you know, to shed light on their story as well, so they won't be forgotten, so justice can be served for them as well. It's something that we're just gonna have to continue doing. It's just something that, you know, in my heart to do. We're not stopping. We're not stopping. Thank you.
Thank you, Janie. You know, I see it on your face and I hear it in your voice, how painful this is for you. I'm wondering if you're able to tell us what the memorial walk does for you. Does it provide strength? Does it, you know, what, you know, I know why do it, and I'm wondering what it does for you and for your family members in terms of endurance and strength. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yes, it gives me great strength, and it also gives me a chance to show people to be strong, to show people not to fear, to show people to stand up. Even family members, speak up. You're not alone. You're not alone. It gives me comfort. Those that attend, those that are able to make it, because we usually put it, host it on a Saturday morning around 10 o'clock, and it goes on for maybe like 3 hours, 4 hours at the most, depends. It shows solidarity with the victims and the family members that are left behind, because they will never be the same. They will never be the same. We will, we will be forever hurting. You know, it's not something that could be repaired.
And Janie, if I may follow up with another question, can you explain when do you typically hold the walk, and what is the route that you all take?
Okay, we hold it depending on May 5th, which was when the day that they took possession of Joe. When the officers took possession of Joe, we either do it the following Saturday. We like to do it the following days, because that's significant of the days it took for us to know about what had happened to him, or find his body when his body was discovered. So we usually do it the Saturday after May the 5th. And we start at where it used to be Club 21, where the actual bar used to be, which is, I believe, is a 4800 block of Canal on the very corner. We start there. If we're walking, originally, because of COVID, we were walking the distance first. We were walking all through Second Ward, taking that starting point on Canal, all the way down straight to Canal, going towards Jensen, passing Clayton Homes, going into Commerce, which the bio where they took them to, the bank, the bio, I don't know, Dr. Watson mentioned it was called something else. I don't quite remember, but
They called it the dead zone.
the dead zone. Okay.
That's where the
Okay,
cops would go sleep and kind of hide
Okay.
out.
Okay. So we've always heard of it as well as the hole, you know, and am I correct, Dr. Watson?
Yeah, other people call it the hole, because it was a clear area you could come to, and it just looked like you could walk to the edge and just you drop off the face of the earth.
Right. Okay. And that's, you know, we've also spoke with other people. Other people have actually reached out to us that were taken there before as well. And, you know, we've heard their stories and things like that, but they barely managed to get away. We do that walk. We go to the hole first. We have our ceremony. I speak. We have a few poets. They speak. Family members, we throw wreaths, you know, fresh flowers in for him, you know. And then we walk back to the McKee Bridge where he was discovered at, and we do another ceremony there and throw flowers there. We have speakers, family members to speak. I chose, in the beginning, I chose to walk the distance, and it's a distance, but it's an important distance to walk. You know, it's not that difficult of a walk once, well, I'm his sister. Once I think about what my brother went through, you know, I get strength to take that walk, and it's a distance, but it's a good walk, you know, it's a good walk. I get a lot of strength that day to make that walk. So with COVID now, this will be the first year that we'll do the drive.
And Janie, if I can ask one more, I intend to ask more questions, and there are already questions coming in from the listening and viewing audience.
Yes.
But I wanted to ask you, what has been the response to this walk by the community, the various diverse communities, and then also, is there a response from law enforcement today when you do this walk, or what is the relationship between you and HPD? If you can speak to some of those things briefly about the response to the walk that you hold annually.
That's good. The community, it varies. It varies. It is a very hot day. It is a very hot morning, so it varies. But as we're walking and we're doing our songs or doing our speeches or our chants, and they see our signs, we get good support from the community as well. As far as the law enforcement, I believe the beginning years, they did go out there. Probably I want to say like the second year, and I guess like the third year they went out there. But when one of them came and asked me if there was anything that they can help me with, to feel free to ask them, and I'm like, there's nothing you can do for me. There's nothing you can do for me. I don't need your help. My brother needed the help. I don't need your help. And I've never seen him again.
Thank you, Janie. Don't go anywhere. We want to talk to you some more, and there are questions coming in about the march and about the walk. I'd like to transition over to Dr. Watson, and similarly, someone has posed a question for you directly, Dr. Watson, and they're wondering if you've faced any pushback from HPD in the process of doing your research.
No, actually, Sam Nucci was chief when I first started doing it. Joe Pratt was at University of Houston then. The two of us went and talked with him, and they were more than gracious with letting me in. And eventually, I was able to sit out where the records were out at the Police History Museum. And I spent a lot of time in DC, the NAACP records and other records like that. And then I spent a lot of time in the Houston Metropolitan Research Collection. And Jesse, what I think I'm going to do is since I'm mostly retired now, I'm going to start turning my files over to TSU on this, and the TSU Riot as well, because I think some graduate students could really use some primary source material.
Absolutely, they would.
But I got very little pushback at all. As a matter of fact, at least 6 or 7 officers who read my book, who saw the various things I talk about in the book, actually thanked me for the stories in the book, because they wanted people to know that all cops weren't bad, that there were some bad actors, but all cops weren't bad. One of the things that I hoped I could get was that by talking about what Jahimchak, the coroner, said, and others, was that Taurus was a man. He was a human being. And I got drunk uncles, man. I had drunk uncles. Come on, dude. You don't treat them like that. When I thought about that, I thought about my Uncle Sonny Boy, and thought about the time cop whipped him. And, we all got that story. We all got that story. And to see Janie this day, this amount of time from the incident, still as passionate and as painful as it is for her. I'm damn near moved to tears, man.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody says, how do you write this stuff? Somebody has to tell this story. Somebody has to tell this story. I did another version of it, but I'm working on the trial now. What did the trials tell us? Because we can learn a lot from trials. And when I think I'm writing an article on the Taurus trial and what things we learned from it. The judicial strategy was important, but also the judges, how they operated as a kind of agent almost of the police themselves.
That's an interesting point you bring up, and someone is asking. In fact, there are two questions that I'll blend together. You know, and this is for the both of you. This is for you, Janie, and Dr. Watson. You know, the question is how was the case, this whole situation, and the verdict reported by local news and by national news? And so the question is, did they tend to report the police versions of the events, or were there newspapers that produced sort of counter narratives? Because as one listener participant stated, in fact, it was the first question on our chat, she stated that she read in a newspaper that Taurus was thrown into the bayou handcuffed, and she wants to know if that is true. And so if you all can speak to the way the media portrayed these events then and perhaps now, as we are at the anniversary mark of it, we'd like to hear what y'all have to say.
Actually, the Houston Post and Houston Chronicle, up to that time, were actually really thorough national news. This was a national issue, man. I probably got 150, 200 different articles on the murder of Joe. And the clippings filed at the police department, and this is something that was interesting. They had clippings files of everything that somebody across the state or country found about the Houston police sent to them. And I was able to see a bunch of that and copy some of that information. But the newspaper was really good. The Mexican-American newspaper and the English version and the African-American newspaper were a bit more aggressive. I can't think of which the newspaper that said he had handcuffs on, but Jahimchek said he didn't. Jahimchek said there were no handcuffs on him. Okay. I think I still have a copy of the coroner's report, and I think it'll be important to add to that collection later. And Janie, if you'd be welcome to go to TSU and see it, because I didn't want to give it to Texas State. I thought it needed to be in Houston somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you, Janie? Same question. Do you recollect? I know you were young when this happened, but perhaps you were able to, and I'm certain you were able to look at papers moving forward. Are you able to remember what kind of coverage the local media did and even the national media did? Or did you think that it was fair, or was it only the police versions? And can you speak about that a little bit, Janie?
I do remember reading in a newspaper article that he had handcuffs on. Now, even as today, I speak with several people that say that he did have handcuffs on. So there are two versions out there.
Yeah.
That he had no handcuffs and that he was handcuffed. I just spoke with somebody maybe a couple of weeks ago that has some type of ties into that actual day that they found him, that he was handcuffed. And I tend to speak with that person again, maybe in a couple of more weeks, and visit him at his place and sit down and talk with him.
Okay.
The media back then, I do remember a lot was more for the police. I do remember that. I do remember standing in front of the TV with my mom and everybody, and they're angry the way the case was being portrayed through media as well. He was a drunk, he was this, how Joe was being described, but not so much of what the actions that those officers did to cause Joe's death. They didn't go like details. I know details. I know that we were notified that day on Mother's Day. I know details.
Yeah.
You know, it's painful. I remember when they came to tell my mom when we were at the theater on Mother's Day. I remember her falling to the ground. I remember my dad trying to hold her. I remember crying, had her by the shirt crying.
Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you.
Yes.
Dr. Pruitt is wondering if if any of you can answer the following question. She is asking, does this type of racist policing begin with emancipation or Reconstruction, or does it start in the antebellum period when slave patrols and whites could legally pursue Blacks and persons of color? Dr. Watson, what are your thoughts on that? This idea of aggressive policing, where does that come from, and how far back does that go in our DNA?
In modern policing, it emerges in the 1920s, not in the antebellum period, because policing in the antebellum period was more like night watchmen, and you had a slave patrol, which was more like a posse, operating more like a posse and not like a legal apparatus. What we start to see, the aggressiveness of the police, it emerges in the 1920s and 30s when you see the Prohibition era. And you start to see this aggression, particularly the rise of cities. As cities start to swell, the aggression to control the ever-growing numbers of people, the police get more and more aggressive. The question about, is it representative of slave patrols? Some Southern sheriff's departments are reflective of that, but not very many Southern cities operated with that kind of slave code. But what we do see, where racism died hardest, you do see some discriminatory practices, such as harsher charges, that a guy that could go to jail for a misdemeanor charge gets a felony charge. And I just read an article where officers said he always tried to charge Blacks he arrested with the more serious crime, even if they didn't do it, because if they didn't have no lawyer, they couldn't vote. So this was a practice in some areas, but Jesse, it is not reflective of old slave codes. And so but don't get me wrong, there are some practices that emulate the process of the perimeter guards. For example, policing within itself now, without community policing, is a kind of perimeter policing. We go out, we go across, we do sector policing as opposed to personal policing, where you're in the community, learning people, talking to people. And community policing works so much better than the other. So why is that? Because the people who are policing have very little relationships to the people who are policed. And I think that's important to note, that the people who are policed often find themselves at the far opposite spectrum in terms of how the police perceive them, not how they perceive police.
Yeah.
I grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas, man. I said this the other day on the radio. I do not remember one time a police officer stopped and said, "How you fellas doing?" All we got was that stern look, that flashing of the lights, or bumping the horn when they wanted us to be out of a place we could lawfully be, like it would get late, 9 o'clock, we were in the park playing basketball. He'd ride through and bump the lights. We had to be in bed at 10 o'clock anyway, because mama was gonna get us. So we didn't need the police to tell us to go home. But with that said, I never remember one of them coming to put up some nets on the goal, or even come out to watch people shoot some hoop. you know, never.
Here's a question, and this is directed to the both of you, Janie and Dr. Watson. During this period, as I understand it, there were several groups that formed alliances. There was this sort of sense of multiracial coalition building that was taking place. And so can the both of you name for the viewers and for all of us some of the organizations that you recall from your own experience and from your research, and or some of the activists that came out during this period? Who were some of the groups and who were some of the people that y'all can remember that were there in 77 through 78 around this incident?
Well, on the Mexican-American side, there was Travis Morales and the other brother, I always forget his name. They were there. But you got to separate many of the Mexican-American or Chicano people from, you got to select them in community activists and political activists. You see what I'm saying? Because you got Ben Reyes and you got those others who will see politics as the way to go, and they will be activists within the political structure. You see, they won't be as so much as grassroots kind of folks. They are using some kind of political clout or some desire. They have some kind of political clout. And so they'll, how do I put it? They kind of shimmy up to the activists in the street. So they got a relationship and they got some legitimacy. Now, what we saw was by 77, 78, we saw the People's Party number 2 emerge as Carl Bernard Hampton, cousin of Fred Hampton and others who would ultimately be shot in the Dowling Street shootout. We saw him, and we saw some of the other more kind of, there was a small group of people call themselves Brown Berets in the community. Then we had Deloitte Parker over at Shape Community Center and others who was at U of H, and they had a group. And so there was a little bit of group cohesion. And when they did good march on City Hall, there was a kind of sharing of the mic. But here's something I think people got to get. The system is so effective at sowing dissension that group cohesion is hard to maintain if you don't have some kind of commonality, common struggle.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? Is when you start saying we all hungry, they fear that more than they fear we all mad. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Because we all hungry. We know what that feeling is. And if that's what we're working, that impulse is to improve the dietary habits of people and make sure people got food on their table, and we can join there and find more common threads to move. That frightens them. Poor people's marches frighten them more than Black folks' marches or brown folk marches, man. Group cohesion is the fear that these organizations have.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And I remember some of the groups that come to mind now, hearing you talk, Dr. Watson. I remember there were activists from Students for a Democratic Society,
Yes.
SDS. There were activists from the Congress of African Peoples related to Shape Community Center. There were also activists, sort of this socialist and left-leaning activists, the Socialist Party, the Young Communist Revolutionary Youth Brigade, they were there.
Yeah.
The Stop Killer Cops Coalition. And so there were several organizations and coalitions that would emerge. But yeah, I agree. I think that they were short-lived. Janie,
oh, excuse me. I'm sorry, Jesse. I think I have some of that, some of those radicals are in some of the old newspapers that I got from the leftist newspaper.
Yeah.
And matter of fact, Jesse, when I come to Houston, I'll call you and I'll maybe drop some of it off to you guys.
Yeah, that'd be great. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Jenny, along the same lines, I'm wondering if you can talk about the role of the church. Was the church ever present for you and your family during this period?
Yes, they were. That was Guadalupe Church that sits on Jensen. Um, they helped out a lot. We had a lot of town hall meetings there, and um, to where they let us use their, I guess it was the cafeteria area, because it was also a school, and it was just packed with people all the way to the outside. So they let us hold our town hall meetings, our rallies there, what needed to be done. Um, we did have a lot of activists. Also, we had LULAC, we had Deloitte Parker was with us through the very beginning, you know. We've had the Brown Berets also. They also came from also other cities. I remember them coming from other cities as well, uh, meeting up. And we've had a lot of rallies, a lot of protests. So there was a lot of people. We had the community of all races out there. We had white, we had blacks, we had Vietnamese, we had all color. We had so much unity. It was just unreal. And that's what I take to heart very much, is remembering the unity that we had then is the same type of unity that I want today for the next family. And that's another thing that I fight for, is unity amongst ourselves out here, to stick together up against police brutality. It's gonna take us all.
Yeah, that was a beautiful thing you just said.
Yeah.
You know, sort of this unity for the next family. Unfortunately, where the question has to be asked, why must there be a next family? Right? There
Exactly.
shouldn't be a next family. People are asking, our viewers and our listeners are asking, if we can maybe transition for a moment and make comments about policing in America today, and talk about specifically the Houston Police Department today. And someone asked, do we see a breakthrough? Do you, the presenters, see a breakthrough regarding police reform, given that the Black Lives Matter movement has sort of taken the issue of police brutality and put it on the global stage? And so, do you see a breakthrough regarding police reform today, either here in Houston or elsewhere? And anybody can answer.
I see a desire for a breakthrough, Jesse, more than I see a breakthrough. I see administrators realizing that the only way that police, as they are currently constituted, can operate effectively is to develop community relations. And if they don't develop community relations, there's going to be some major moves to break up the police as they're currently constituted. For example, a lot of the functions that we call police for, I'm looking for people eventually to pass laws to forbade them from doing mental health calls. I remember growing up that the state hospital used to come out and do mental health calls, not the police. And so what I'm starting to see is that there are voices inside the police department who were once quiet, starting to speak louder about being the good cop, being representative of the police and not the bad cop. You know, somebody says, why are there so many shootings? The absence of empathy leads to aggressive actions against those you don't know. And you know, you can't teach empathy, man. They gotta want to have it. They gotta want to have it. And what I don't see in some areas, Jesse, I think we're about 5 years, 6 years away from some kind of substantive breakthrough, because you know, institutions take a while to change. Even when they put it on paper, it takes a while for it to sink in.
How about you, Janie? Same question. Do you see that there are any breakthroughs regarding police reform?
Honestly, I do not. I'm out here. I'm out here in the real world, and I see things here at home, things here in Houston, how they're going. Um, just with the recent uh, killing of the Tuttles, the recent killing of Nicholas Chavez. So, and this is 40 plus years after Joe, and it's still happening. It shouldn't have happened. These other cases, even after Joe, should not have happened, even at today's time, in nationwide. They shouldn't be happening. So I don't see it in my lifetime, but I'm gonna work to help make that change. And maybe once I'm no longer here, someone can pick up once I'm no longer here. But I honestly, I don't see it.
Thank you for that honest response, Jenny.
Thank you.
What are some of the reforms that people are asking for? You know, there seems to be a lot on the table, and there are different communities and different cities and different city councils that are reviewing different proposals, if you will. So, for example, I heard to reform police departments and to reform law enforcement, we must end the war on drugs, or we must end mass incarceration, or we must abolish the private prison systems. And all those sound like viable and doable potential solutions. What are other kinds of reforms that people are asking for that might provide that breakthrough? I think that Dr. Pruitt was asking, that might provide that breakthrough regarding police reform. What are the people asking about, Dr. Watson?
Number one is to remove qualified immunity, hold you responsible for your actions. I know as a man, even though I've been teaching a long time, if I do something illegal in the classroom, I go to jail. Why doesn't that apply to when I worked in the prison system? If I did something criminal, I got arrested. So the other thing is the use of deadly force. There must be some new rules, the use of deadly force. And there must become a criminal penalty for excessive force in the arresting of a prisoner. Once you have a prisoner handcuffed, there should be no more beating, no more nothing other than transporting that person to jail. But this whipping a man on the ground who, because you're saying he won't sit up, or he won't, come on, man, that's not a dog. So we got to come up with some standards that essentially say, one, you're culpable for your actions. Two, the line is drawn here. You don't pull this gun. You don't use this. Here's the base standard for it. And here's the minimum and maximum standard. And they're much higher than we have now. We also must take away the justification, that fear is a justification for killing people. If you are afraid, don't be a police officer. You know, if you're scared, don't mess with it. And that's how I feel about it. I did some of the job, and when you're afraid of it, you need to get out of it.
How about you, Janie? Same question. From your own activism, what have you heard and what are you calling for, and what are your colleagues and your sisters and brothers and calling for to reform police departments?
Full accountability. Full accountability when they do something wrong.
Absolutely.
Plain and simple. Full accountability across the board. They should not be allowed to get away with same crimes that would be applied to me as punishment for drug possession, and they have to figure out another way rather than just using deadly force.
Mhm.
There has to be some other way. You know, right away, it's like if deadly force is the first thing that they're out for.
Hey, Jesse,
There's no
Yeah.
way that they had to do that to Nicolas Chavez. That's picture is in thousands of people's mind already. They did not have to do that to George Floyd. That picture is in thousands of people's mind nationwide. And they say this is America, then why is this happening? Why does this still continue to happen? And then they get away with it. Why does it have to take for us to take to the streets and to demand justice? We shouldn't be having to be demanding justice, be getting arrested, be getting knocked down, be getting pepper sprayed, be getting a rubber bullets thrown at us because we want justice. And this is supposed to be America? I just lost a son a couple of years ago in the Army. And Joe was in the Army also. We shouldn't have to be fighting for justice in our own country. They need full accountability across the board.
absolutely.
Thank you, Janie. Dr. Watson, you wanted to say something?
You know, the idea that you can kill somebody, say you're afraid, and suffer no responsibility for that action does not exist anywhere in the world but here.
Hmm.
Nowhere. And so we have to demand that the court rethink some of these precedents that they set under Roberts. Because the Roberts court has essentially made it okay to violate the law as long as we say it isn't a crime. But it's against the law, murder. But it ain't a crime if you're scared. No. You know, it's a crime to beat somebody. It's a crime to unlawfully imprison somebody. Like you see something and you off work and you say, I thought he was robbing somebody, and you hold a private citizen like they're doing. And you are not held culpable for that. You get a day off work and they give you vacation the day they suspend you. Come on. You know, we have to become accountable. This plea, it really frustrated me because when I heard it, I knew what they were going to do, this idea of abolishing police. What I knew they were saying was we must abolish functions that the police are operating in that they should not be in. They should not be operating in mental health. They should not be operating in family disputes where there is no violence. You know? There are some places police don't need to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the other part of that is we got to set a higher standard for who becomes a police officer. Something I don't think you guys know. One of the guys who defends police now killed 3 folks. He's a lawyer defending people in Houston. He killed 3 black men while he worked on the HPD. Went to law school. Now he's a lawyer defending police who break the law.
I want to, that's troubling. I want to get to, in the last few moments that we have here, I want to get to these other questions from our viewers and our listeners. And before that, I want to mention very quickly the other suggestions that I've heard in terms of reforming police departments and law enforcement agencies. was to end programs that fund police departments with military arsenal, for example. That's what they mean by demilitarizing the police, because that sort of creates this culture of warfare in the city, urban warfare. I've also heard, for example, eliminating the no-knock warrants that many
Absolutely.
departments often have. And then similarly, I've heard efforts to defund the police, which means, which doesn't mean abolish the police department. It means, sending funds to other kinds of budget items and line items that would train police in mental health or cultural competency and things like that. And so, I sort of wanted to put those out there as well in terms of what we think about when we think about police reform. But I wanted to get to the last questions here from our audience, and others are still pouring in. So please, we will take your questions and we will send them to Dr. Watson and to Janie if we don't get to answer them here tonight. We only have just a few moments left. But here's a question for Janie, I imagine. Someone is asking, and I think it's our friend Laurie, is asking how students can become involved and support this work, Janie. So is there a way that people can sign up with you and team up with you and collaborate with you for the memorial walk and those kinds of things? Jenny, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, Jesse. Yes, most definitely. They can go to the Solidarity Walk Facebook page, and there's a way to contact me, or they can contact me through there as well. There's a lot of ways to get involved. Every bit helps, by contributing, by showing up, by supporting, by passing information along, even being a support system for a family here locally. If they're in Houston, I'm in contact with Nicholas Chavez's mom,
Yeah.
and family. It's painful. It's painful for me to even hear her story, because I know what she's feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah, they can easily go to the page, and there's ways to contact me there.
Thank you. And what we'll do is we are running out of time here. We can certainly go on for another hour or so, but we'll respect everyone's time. Dr. Watson and Janie, we are going to send you a few more questions by way of email. And we will try to collect your responses and share them with our group here. Dr. Tovar, I don't know how we can do that. Someone is asking about how we can teach this in our classrooms and, with lawmakers sort of thinking about eliminating critical race theory and civil rights history from our curriculum. Is this something that we can do to teach these in our classrooms? Others are asking about police brutality on people of color, and then training. So there's a few questions left that we have not been able to address, but we will try to get responses to these individuals. But I wanted to, before I turn it over back to Dr. Tovar, I wanted to again thank Dr. Watson and thank Jenny Torres for their presentations, for their honesty, the brutality that is much needed, and for sharing with us a bit of your knowledge and a bit of your soul, so that we might learn and understand and begin to heal. So thank you. I'll turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Tovar at the Holocaust Museum. But I thank the both of you, and please enjoy the rest of your night and your weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you, Janie.
Dr.
Thank you,
Watson.
Dr. Watson. And thank you to our viewers for joining us tonight. Thank you so much. The exhibit Withstand that's in correlation with this talk tonight is now on view through October. We hope that you can join us on May 19th for a virtual conversation with Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, author of How to Be an Anti-Racist. This event is free and open to the public. Please visit our website at hmh.org to learn more. And as always, students K through 12 are always free at the museum. You can also follow us on Instagram and on Twitter at Boniac Center and at HMHOU. Again, thank you for joining us. If you would like more information about the 6th annual Joe Campos Torres Solidarity Drive on May 8th at 11 a.m., please follow the link that's in the chat or find Joe Campos Torres on Facebook as well. Thank you again, Dr. Esparza, for moderating this important conversation.